when I play this on the podcast, people are going to just like feel my enthusiasm just like coming off of their phones as I play this.
Hello! My name's Markus, also known as the Chinterviews. Welcome to the Chinterviews. Today, I have the honor to be joined by Maddy Searle. They are a sound designer, audio producer with experience as a voice actor, director, writer, and TTRPG performer, founder of Snazzy Tapir Productions, creator of podcasts such as A Game of One's Own, and cast member on Realms of Peril and Glory. Maddy, welcome aboard.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you here, Maddy. Let us just dive right into it. Who exactly is Maddy, and how did you get into the beautiful world of tabletop RPGs?
Well, I first got into tabletop gaming when I was studying for my radio MA degree at Goldsmiths at University of London, and the wonderful Ella Watts, who many people in the TTRPG space may know, was the first person to ever run a game for me and some people on our course. It was a game of 13th Age. I played a catfolk wizard called Midnight, not realizing that spellcasting classes are the most complicated for beginners. But I had a wonderful time. She kind of gave us sort of gifts in game. It was very sweet and lovely. And then I started watching Critical Role from the start of Campaign 2. And from then on, it was just an endless spiral into the deep, dark rabbit hole of tabletop gaming.
And from your first experience with tabletop RPGs, seeing also other people play it as on Critical Role, you also made your way into the world of actual plays. What got you into that? I mean, probably maybe Critical Role inspired parts of that, but was there anything else that got you to dip your toes into the waters of actual plays?
I think it's a common story that during the pandemic we had nothing to do, and so we played a lot of tabletop games, and I got into a bunch of very fun long running games during that time, which was a big relief to have something to kind of focus on, and one of them was my first actual play experience for Realms of Peril and Glory, playing the Veil campaign, which uses 13th Age, and playing my necromancer character Isadora Ravenwood, who is very, very kind of self-insert-ish, as many early characters are. And I really loved that experience. And we're currently recording Campaign 2 over a very long period of time. So at some point in the very distant future, you may hear more from our characters in that campaign. And you'll be in for a treat, because it's just the other players on that game are just so talented and so great at improvising and storytelling and making really funny and moving moments. It's one of the most rewarding kind of tabletop experiences I've had.
Was there anything that stood out to you when you started recording actual plays in comparison to just playing in your home game? Any big differences you noticed immediately?
I think the kind of awareness that it was for an audience and the performance element of it was very apparent. But as someone who did a lot of theatre as a kid at school, that was kind of a welcome sort of return to that performance element for me. I can see how for people it may be sort of intimidating, the aspect of, oh, this is not just a fun game that we're playing for ourselves, this is for an audience. But I quite like that added element of pressure, because it really forces you to think about, okay, what is the continuity of my character? What does my character know in this moment and not know? And and because Vale is essentially a kind of a mystery campaign where we're following clues and leads, I'm always taking loads of notes and trying to make sure that I'm like, I need to solve this mystery, both as myself and as the character. So, and yeah, and just the kind of very sort of gentle and enjoyable pressure of on everyone to make sure that we're at the top of our game makes for really kind of juicy storytelling moments.
Would you say that in actual play, thus, the improv theater part of tabletop RPGs is even more pronounced?
Yeah, I think so because I think often in home games you can kind of get away with kind of saying like my character says that blah blah blah, not really going into your character voice or kind of glossing over things. Whereas in actual play, you're much more encouraged to play things out in scenes and go for a much more kind of narrative structure to things. And also, while there is some kind of like goofing off type stuff where you do a silly joke at the table, and that's always fun to have as an element of an actual play to kind of show that we're real people playing a game. It's also helpful to sometimes keep that to a minimum so that you're focusing on the story at hand.
So, with your first experiences of actual plays under your belt, sooner or later, I think you also discovered the world of solo and duo RPGs. I wonder, what got you into solo and duo RPGs?
The first game, solo game that I played was Thousand Year Old Vampire by Tim Hutchings. And it's just a beautiful book. I initially didn't have the hard copy, I just had the PDF, and that is absolutely gorgeous. Later on, I managed to get a hard copy, and I was so excited. And yeah, it was just a perfect mixture of I love vampire stories. Playing a necromancer, you can tell I like sort of goth themes, so it was right up my street. And I also have kind of dabbled with writing a lot throughout my life, and I often find it difficult to pick just one idea and run with it or be motivated to finish a completed project. But with a solo RPG, it gives you the structure to create a completed thing and sort of rules within which to do that. And I always find that I often do my best creative work when I'm working within a structure and have constraints, because that forces me to be creative within the constraints.
Thousand Year Old Vampire also excels at giving you a framework to tell a story. The way it not just randomizes the story, but the mechanics really structure the story you're telling and really evoke the feel of you're telling the story of this entity that can live through hundreds and hundreds of years of human history. It's just so well done, and it has these excellent prompts that really get you thinking about, oh, what would my character do in this situation, which really can inspire a lot of great writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of the resource management element of it as well. Like you only have a certain amount of memories that you can preserve at any one time. If you forget things from your earlier life and you only have certain sort of physical resources, and eventually obviously your vampire is going to expire, is going to meet some horrible end. But it kind of, yeah, it gives that sort of slow decline a very beautiful arc, and it feels, even though it's deeply sad, it feels satisfying because it's touching on so many kind of important themes and emotions.
Solo RPGs are one side. Those are games that you play by yourself, but we also know of duo RPGs, the ones where you have one fellow player. Regarding those duo RPGs, any specific duo RPGs that have stood out to you as you played them with someone else?
I really enjoyed playing Not Yet with Anne on Horde of Tales. It was really fun, and it just the prompts sort of the prompts really allowed you to get into that very emotional kind of tender space of a new relationship, or a possible connection, and that sort of tantalizing thing of just missing someone, not quite the right time, and yeah, and then that makes the eventual meeting, even though it's just the beginning of a relationship, it feels satisfying because you've had to have restraint before that, and then it allows you to kind of go fully emotional into the finale.
It's also the kind of narrative that we see, of course, a lot in movies. Not yet is inspired by an entire genre of movies and other fiction that we know, but it is the kind of narrative that we don't see in RPGs often. So would you say that also makes it extra interesting to explore that kind of space?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested in bringing other mediums or other stories or other genres into tabletop gaming and seeing how that adapts. I'm very interested in the kind of adaptation process. I've kind of had a couple of ideas kicking around in my head for games for a while. That I've not sort of had a chance to work on because I have too many ideas all at the same time. But one of them is I've been watching a lot of the X-Files recently for the first time, very, very late. But I like the idea of making some kind of tabletop game which has the structure of like a 90s genre TV show where you have the cold open where it's characters you haven't met yet and a monster appears and it's like, oh no, something bad's happened. Then you go to the title sequence and then you go to it's the investigators in the office and they're discussing the case and like I'm kind of following that very kind of formulaic rigid structure but having fun within that. I think that would be fun.
If it's inspired by X-Files, you can even, if it's specifically a duo RPG that you're planning for this, you could also play with the dynamic that Scully and Mulder have in the show, where you have two players who have to be like these two different kind of investigators who approach all these cases from different angles. One of them maybe thinking it must be something supernatural, and the other one looking for the more grounded solution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think I hadn't considered the sort of the dynamic angle, but I found that when spoilers for a very old TV show, Mulder disappears towards the back half of the X-Files. I really missed the dynamic between Mulder and Scully, and I skipped forward to the more recent kind of event seasons where they're back together because I was just like, I need them back. This has become the show for me. It feels wrong that that Mulder's not there.
And it does go to show from what kind of places you can get inspiration to creating games. I think sometimes in the TTRPG world, especially for people who are new to the hobby, they look at TTRPGs, and of course you see the big names with the big fantasy genre games with a lot of action, dungeon crawling, and the likes. And don't get me wrong, I love the genre. I love doing that. But at the same time, there's also in the past years, more and more games have been popping up that explore different genres and evoke different kind of narratives and show also the versatility of TTRPGs in what they can achieve and how they can present themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of those people that just kind of loves variety in everything. I have my own personal sort of preferences and specific things that I really enjoy, but I always want to have a big sort of mixture of various different influences and ideas. So yeah, one day I might be playing a very kind of battle heavy game of D&D where it's very tactics focused and it's like, oh, if I put a cloud of daggers here, then that means that all the enemies will have to be go through this choke point and they'll all get damaged and or they'll have to be kept back and more vulnerable to ranged attacks, blah 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 blah. Or if playing a more kind of emotional drama focused game using like Powered by the Apocalypse system or something similar, where it's just like really angsty vampires just having a really sad time. Like I'm very excited for Paint the Town Red by Soul Muppet Publishing coming up because I'm just gonna eat that up. I'm so excited. So yeah, it's the variety of experiences where you can go very kind of tactical and granular and into the war game kind of origins of the hobby and then more into the improvisational storytelling elements and also yeah, as you say, the various different genres from sci-fi to horror to fantasy.
You've been playing a variety of solo and duo RPGs in your time with the hobby, and sooner or later that led you to actually make your own podcast about them, a game of one's own, which is dedicated to solo and duo RPGs. What got you to make the step to also recording your own podcast about those games?
Well, as someone who was already in podcasting, mainly in audio fiction, I had the audio editing skills, I had the sound design skills, and it was a way of kind of combining my work and my hobby in a lovely kind of mixture. And I was also I'd also actually only played Thousand Year Old Vampire before making the podcast, and I was just like, I want an excuse to play more solo RPGs, and I know that I'm not going to do it unless it's for a thing. So, and then while I was coming up with the idea, coming up with the name, which is a play on A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, because I always like to have a little pretentious reference in there, I was I kind of came across the concept of duo RPGs, duet RPGs, and thought, well, that'd be a nice way of bringing in guests, but in a sort of more manageable way, so you're not having to coordinate a group of 6 adults, which I'm very happy to do some of the time, but most of the time I'm very happy for other people to do that organizing for me. Whereas just getting one other person or 2 other people to play a GM-less game is a lot more manageable.
After having started that podcast and recording a few of those episodes, any lessons learned, any good best practices that you experienced from recording your first episodes of your own TTRPG podcast?
It was interesting in terms of I wasn't quite sure how to um, format me playing the game versus the sort of solo journaling entries that I produced. In the first couple of games that I played, Mountaintop Isolation and Dragon Dowser, I interspersed me getting the prompts and reacting to them as a player, and then going into the journaling and performing the entries as the character. But I think that for the next solo RPG that I play on the podcast, I want to try a different approach where I introduce the game, talk a bit about how it works, but then largely leave out the mechanical elements of choosing each prompt and that kind of thing, and just kind of then move it into essentially a little audio drama based on the prompts that I've seen and the journal entries that I've written, and see if that works any better. And then if it doesn't work, I can always go back to the other format. But I'm interested to see, because I'm interested in kind of using it as a way to create a sort of little self-contained story that someone can immerse in. And if someone isn't as interested in the mechanical elements, they can just kind of skip that bit and just listen to the nice story.
Because that's also the kind of balance that you have to find in these kind of recordings. On the one hand, you're playing a game and you're thinking that people who listen to your podcast, they also want to listen to how the game is played. But on the other hand, especially solo RPGs, they generate stories. And you also want to translate those stories into an interesting audio product to listen to, because there's also people who listen to them because they want to hear the story.
Yeah, it's one that I'm still kind of trying to figure out how it works in a game where you're the only person kind of guiding the whole experience. In a duet game, it's much more like a traditional multiplayer TTRPG where you're often one person is kind of facilitating it and saying, this is how the game works, this is what you need to do now. And then as the game goes on and it's kind of the rules become more apparent, it goes more into a flow of one player talking to the other and responding. But yeah, in a solo RPG, you have to figure out how that flow works yourself. And that's something that I'm still kind of interested in figuring out the best way to do that.
Is that also a bit of matter of experimentation for yourself, just playing around and finding what works best for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I found that when I was recording Dragon Dowser, I really enjoyed playing the game, but the practical element of recording myself, selecting the prompts, and then stopping recording to go and write the entry, and then coming back to record myself performing the entry felt very kind of disjointed and felt like the experience was not as the designer intended. So I'm wondering if sort of describing the mechanical process and then transferring into the story may work better in terms of my own experience of the game, and hopefully if I'm kind of more immersed in it and enjoying it more, then that will come across to an audience.
I think that's also one of the things that you hope, of course, when you're creating these kind of podcasts, that your enthusiasm also translates well towards the audience, that they pick up on how much fun you had in making this, which gets them interested in also trying it out for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I had a lot of fun at Dragon Meet in December, going up to the UK Tabletop Industry Network stand and seeing all the like solo and duet games that they had there. And there was one game, Scribe, that I picked up, and I was just like, this is just the perfect intersection of my interests, because it's all about cuneiform and Bronze Age civilization, and I'm just like, this very specific nerdy thing that I'm really into. And I'm like, when I play this on the podcast, people are gonna just like feel my enthusiasm just like coming off of their phones as I play this.
Now I'm curious about that game. It's called Scribe, you say?
Yeah, so Scribe is a solo journaling game by Frederick Walker, and it's only £4 on itch. So if you haven't got it already, I would recommend it. It's a Wretched and Alone game, so it uses playing cards for the prompts, and which is similar to Mountaintop Isolation, another by La Lyon Publishing. I'm just reading the kind of blurb of it. Watching the collapse of civilization in the late Bronze Age and trying to ensure your kingdom survives it. So I'm very fascinated by ancient civilizations and cultures and the collapse thereof. So yeah, and there's lots of beautiful kind of cuneiform writing in the art of the game. And I have a tattoo which has cuneiform writing on it. And there's also a multiplayer TTRPG called Nibiru, which I played during the pandemic, which I absolutely adore, and also features cuneiform as a motif in the design, because it's inspired by ancient Mesopotamian culture, despite being a sci-fi game. So yeah, there's just like a weird confluence of all my interests, kind of in these very specific games that are not big like D&D, but just scratch my particular itch.
You also earlier mentioned briefly going to conventions. Dragon Meet specifically was mentioned earlier, and you do have some interesting convention experience in the form of actually doing live shows there. Maddy, would you like to tell us about your experience with that, how you got to actually do live shows, and what was it like to play in front of a live audience?
It was fantastic. The first Game of One's Own live show that I did was playing To the Bitter End with Zach, fellow Realms of Peril and Glory person, which is a game about bitter rivals. And so we played these embittered bounty hunters in a sort of Star Wars-esque sci-fi setting, and it got very ridiculous and very petty in an enjoyable way. And yeah, it helps knowing the person very well if you're doing a sort of rivalry story, because then you know that you're safe to kind of be ridiculous with it, and no one's going to think that it's actually a real rivalry. And more recently, I did a live show at UKGE again for a Game of One's Own with Naomi Clark and Nathan Blades, playing What Possessed You, by Tim Roberts, which is a game where you do an amateur seance and you get possessed by various different spirits. And that was deeply chaotic and very fun. A kind of an important lesson I learned from that, which I kind of had sort of picked up previously, but it really solidified it for me, was that Naomi didn't really kind of follow the rules as written during the game, but it didn't really matter because everyone was having a great time, and she was bringing the comedy and the improv, and I think just the way that my brain works, just being on that kind of neurodivergent end of the spectrum, where I need rules in order to kind of to feel comfortable and safe. But if someone else prefers not to and just kind of needs to throw them out the window in order to tell a good story, I'm just like, yeah, that's great. Just whatever works for the individual person. And yeah, it ended up being a very fun and chaotic story that the audience seem to enjoy.
When you're playing these kind of live games in front of actual physically present people, is it to you even more of a performance, more of an improv performance than in an actual play that might be pre-recorded or live streamed without people being present?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're getting the live feedback of laughs and gasps and all these kinds of things. So yeah, you're much more kind of responsive to the the feeling in the room and what's working and what's not. So you can really kind of play off the audience, and you can also, yeah, sometimes you get sort of suggestions, or you get kind of people calling out, and mostly in my experience in a positive way. So yeah, that can be really fun to get that immediate feedback, and yeah, that really elevates the energy of the performers, because you're seeing like, no, people are enjoying this. This is great. And so yeah, while playing online, you can still get that energy from the other players. Having a whole room full of other people who are also enjoying it just elevates it that little bit more.
Is there any game that you would love to play in front of a live audience one day?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Um, there is a game called Frontier Scum, which is a kind of Morkborg style cowboy game about really awful outlaws. And I just think that the character potential of playing really, really kind of scrungly awful cowboys in front of an audience could be really fun. I think partly I just want to play that game anyway. But I think that just the potential for characterization would be really interesting. And yeah, depending on whether it's kind of a more structured adventure or whether you're using the copious random tables that these kind of games offer, it could either be a kind of a quite curated live experience, or it could be a much more chaotic, let's just see where the wind blows sort of situation.
I can also imagine that something Merkborg based like Frontier Scum is also rules light in its approach, which also makes it easier to improvise and actually more focus on the improv element of the story instead of getting too nitty gritty with the rules at the actual play.
Yeah, for sure. It gives a sort of solid bare bones base, so that you don't need to worry too much about kind of adding in your own rules on the fly, but it gives enough space so that yeah, you can definitely concentrate on the role play elements, and yeah, not worry too much about like, but you're not within 5 feet of the target, so you can't cast that spell. So yeah.
If you would hear that someone you know is going to play a live game somewhere, is there any words of wisdom or advice you would have for them?
I think that it's very natural to be nervous in that situation. I know I always get nervous before live things, but it's always good to remember that if you're having fun, the audience will be having fun. So try not to worry too much about offering something specific that you think the audience would like to see. Think more about what will allow you to have most fun. And if you know the people that you're playing with, kind of how what they enjoy, so that you can kind of bring your own little gifts and offer them to the other players.
In that same line of thought, if anyone who's listened to this conversation of us is thinking like, oh, I would also like to try my hand at a TTRPG podcast. I want to record my games that I have with these cool group of people, and I want to make a podcast out of them. Is there like any number one, maybe even two tips that you would have to anyone getting into podcast editing specifically for tabletop RPGs?
I would probably say start small and work up. Choose a very kind of limited scope project that you can take from start to end relatively easily. And yeah, and the other piece of advice would be just learn by doing. It's obviously terrifying to try and do a thing that you haven't done before, but the only way that you'll know what you don't know is by trying it. And as you're going through the process of, wait, what software should I use? Then you go and research and you look at what all the different softwares are and which one would work best for you. Then you go into the editing process and you go, wait, how do I do X, Y, or Z? You go look up a YouTube video and it tells you how to do the thing. So yeah, it's only really as you go through the process and figure out, oh, that's a thing that I don't know how to do, I'll go find out, that you learn the things that you need to learn.
Very good. Thank you very much for sharing that. And Maddy, also, thank you very much for sharing everything here in this conversation. I was really happy to hear you talking about your entrance into the hobby, your experience with solo and duet RPGs, and actually doing live shows of the game. So thank you very much for sharing this here in this Chinterview.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I had a wonderful time. And yeah, I hope that at least some of my rambling was useful to someone.
If you've listened to this episode and you want to check out what Maddy is up to, where you can find them, there will be links to all of their profiles and important information in the description of this episode. So feel free to check Maddy out. Check out Snazzy Tapir Productions, check out A Game of One's Own, and all the other cool stuff that Maddy is involved in. Thanks everyone for listening to this conversation. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.